Hey, thanks for checking out the Mixed Church YouTube channel. I hope today's message helps you with your walk with Jesus and puts you closer to Him.
He said, "Don't be misled, my dear brothers and sisters. Whatever is good and perfect is a gift coming down to us from God our Father, who created all the lights in the heavens. He never changes or casts a shifting shadow." I want you all to do me a big favor, and I know you all hate this, or at least 50% of you hate this, but I want you to turn to one of your neighbors, actually both of them, hit both of them, and give them our message title, which is, "It's Growing on Me." It's growing on me. Come on. It's growing on me. I have to issue an apology. Last week, we started this series called White Elephant, and I was operating with the assumption that you all knew what White Elephant was. I never once brought up what White Elephant is, and I was just like, oh, everyone knows what White Elephant was, and I was giving it some thought this last week, and I was like, well, maybe they don't. And so let me rewind. How many of y'all know what White Elephant is? How many of y'all have experienced White Elephant? Okay, most people, but some of y'all didn't raise your hand. And so I've got to back up here a little bit and give a little bit of insight to what White Elephant is. But instead of me telling you what White Elephant is, I actually found a great clip from a TV show, old TV show that breaks down how White Elephant is played. And so instead of me giving you the rules, I thought we'll just show this clip. And just a forewarning, for those of you who are allergic to laughing in church, just get on your phone for the next 4 minutes, okay? But those of you who are open to laughing in church, this could be funny. Before I play the video, I just want to issue 2 disclaimers. Number one, this is an old TV show. Some of you weren't even born. Others of you are not even 10 years old. This is early 2000s stuff, mid 2000s stuff, okay? So it's very old, okay? So I'm sorry if I'm dating myself. And some of the references that you're going to get, I'll explain afterwards what those devices were. And the second thing that I want to point out is that, as with anything really, except for the Word of God, I'm not endorsing everything that happened in this show or anything like that. But I just felt like this was just a really helpful piece of just helpful illustration. I think that as we watch it, you're going to see very clearly just the deep theological and spiritual content in it. Are you ready for it? All right, cool. Let's roll that video.
Presents are the best way to show someone how much you care. It is like this tangible thing that you can point to and say, hey man, I love you, this many dollars worth.
First present, Oscar.
Shower radio, neat.
Oh, great. That was for me.
Thanks, Kelly. I was going to get one of these.
Okay, that's enough. Let's keep it moving on. Jim?
Oh, cool.
That's for me?
Great. Where'd you get it?
I don't know. It was so long ago.
He obviously forgot to get me something. And then he went into his closet and dug out this little number. And then threw it in a bag.
Yep, that's exactly what happened.
Pam.
Oh my God! Thank you very much, Santa, whoever you are. It's awesome.
There's a little more to it.
All right, next. Ryan.
No.
Whoa, video iPod.
Oh, wow, jeez. Somebody really got carried away with the spirit of Christmas. That was me. I got carried away with the spirit.
Wasn't there a $20 limit on the gift? This is $400.
You don't know that.
Yeah, you left the price tag on.
I did?
Yeah.
What? Oh, shoot. Wow. Okay, well, who cares? Doesn't matter what I spent. What matters is that Christmas is fun, right? Michael. Oh, hey, for me. What is in here? Oh, come on.
I knitted it for you.
An oven mitt? Okay.
So Phyllis is basically saying, hey, Michael, I know you did a lot to help the office this year, but I only care about you a homemade oven mitt's worth. I gave Ryan an iPod.
Should we just keep opening up the presents?
We don't do anything until Michael gives us further instructions.
I got it. We are going to turn Secret Santa into Yankee Swap.
What is Yankee Swap?
One person chooses a gift. The next person can either choose a gift or steal that person's gift. If your gift gets stolen, then you can steal someone else's gift or choose a new gift.
I thought that was called Nasty Christmas.
Yeah, we call it White Elephant.
Well, I call it fun.
Why are we doing this?
Because it's better, because it's more special.
It sounds mean.
No, it's not. Okay, just give it a shot.
Michael should have asked the party planning committee first. He's not supposed to just spring things on us out of nowhere.
Okay, Meredith is up first. Here's the deal. You can either pick a new gift or you can steal somebody else's gift they've already gotten, like the oven mitt.
I'll take the teapot.
Oh, shouldn't we? About that specifically for Pam.
Yankee Swap! That's what makes it fun. Pam, you can steal the oven mitt now.
I'll take the iPod.
And I have to give it to her. I don't have a choice.
Yes. Now you can steal the oven mitt, the old shirt, or the shower radio, or pick a new gift.
That was meant for Kelly.
Yeah, I figured.
All right, just because some of you are going to be distracted. So, video iPod. How many of y'all had a video iPod back in the day? All right, yes, I just got to clear this gap up real quick. Once upon a time, there was a season, an era in our country when not everyone had a smartphone, all right? And you literally had a separate device for watching videos. Very dark, all right? How we survived it, I don't know, but we did. All right, now that that's addressed, what a great illustration, I think, of how we think God gives gifts. What we think God is like. Where at worst, the series is called White Elephant. At worst, we think that like God just kind of, puts presents out there, under a tree, and they're just out there for us to discover, pick up, look at it, and they're just kind of random. And apparently there's some sort of number system because some people wind up with better things, and so you just better hope you get another shot to steal or trade away your gift. Or at best, we can sometimes think of God's gifts like Michael Scott's Secret Santa, or his version of Secret Santa. I love the line, I don't know if you caught it right at the beginning, where, Christmas is that magical time of the year where we just are able to, show people, this is how many dollars worth. I love you, And it's funny, but it's funny because there's a lot of truth in it. And not just with people, because come on, we all do that every year. It's like, got $50 friends. And we got $25 friends. But it's also true in how we view God and how we think God gives gifts. We think that the gifts and the experiences that we have are a reflection of how God feels about you. And Merry Christmas, you're kind of at an oven mitt type of season with God. It's like, gee, thank you so much. And so we can sometimes think of God giving gifts like White Elephant, where it's just random, or it's Secret Santa, and it's, it's on purpose. It's how God feels about you. And I love how Michael Scott was so excited about Secret Santa up until the point he got the oven mitt from Phyllis. And I know some of you are going to smirk at me for making this correlation, but this is just how my brain works. That's what we do all the time. Where we're so pumped up about our relationship with God, we're so excited about God, we're in here worshiping, and even though we're not, big on movement during worship, we're open to the whole, Brandon Lake, like, praise, and we're getting into it, where we're super, super, intrigued by what God is doing in our lives, so long as it's something that we asked for, up until the point that it's something that, we get something from God that was not on our Christmas list, and then as soon as something like that happens in life, Yankee Swap. let's see if we can trade this away. Is there an option that I can just like kind of evade this and get what someone else is getting? And so the objective of this series is pretty simple. It's to learn how to embrace the unexpected and many times odd gifts of God, because that's what he does. It's kind of a byproduct of having a relationship with a divine, infinite being. When he gives us things, when he does things in our lives, they're going to be unexpected. They're going to be odd. And so last week we kicked off this series, and I established one of, if not the most important starting place for us if we're going to properly interpret and embrace what God is doing in our lives by the first point, which was a very long one-pointed message, but still it was just a one-point message. And the one point that we established last week was that not everything you've been given is from God, but in the end, everything's going to be made right. And until then, God can turn all things for good. If you weren't here last week or you didn't listen to the podcast, you can listen to it this week. That's kind of why we post the messages online. But it's so critical in our relationship with God that we have what we've been talking about many times this year, a gospel-oriented view of the world and what's happening in our lives. Because the gospel, the full extent of the gospel, informs us that this world is still very much broken, that bad things happen, that this world is very much in a state of bondage and decay, like Paul said in Romans 8 that we looked at that last week. But the good news, aka the gospel, for those who love God, who are leaning into his ways, is that we have hope that God's going to make things right. There's going to be an expiration date on the suffering. There's going to be an end date on all of the pain. And even better than that, until that happens, we can have a confident hope in what's happening right now, because God is even able to take bad things and bring goodness out of them. Let me take this a step further real quick, because last week my emphasis was on like the bad things that happen to us and how people have hurt you and chronic pain and sickness. But let me put an addition on that point, that Romans 8:28 also includes the bad things you've done. Romans 8:28 is all things. Somebody say all things. All things. Yes, how people hurt you. Yes, the mistakes people have made that impacted you. Yes, but get this, it also includes your worst mistakes. God can still bring goodness out of things like that. This is going to surprise some of us, but God can and wants to bring goodness out of your greatest regrets. God can and he wants to bring goodness out of your worst mistakes. Does that mean that there aren't going to be consequences for your actions? No, that's not what that means. Not at all. But it does mean that God wants to change the conclusion. It does mean that God determines the end product. Let me stay on this point, because I know some of us are wrestling with a regret or two. Here's a better way to wrestle with your regrets. Own your consequences. Own your consequences. But then embrace God's conclusion. Own the consequences of your mistake. Fall on your sword. Humble yourself. Own it. Say you're sorry. It was wrong. You messed up. Own the consequences. But then turn to Romans 8:28, and this is the crazy grace of God that he wants us to enjoy. Then turn to Romans 8:28 and go, okay, but God says he can bring goodness out of all things. So own the consequences, but then embrace God's conclusion. Turn to God and just begin to say, okay, God, this is wild. I don't know why you would want to bring goodness out of this. But God, you say you bring good out of all things for those who love you and are called according to your purpose. And so even though I wasn't loving you or leaning into your purpose when I did that, I am now. And so I'm believing, God, that you can take even that bad thing and bring goodness out of it. see this happen all the time. It's why we see like very different experiences where something bad happens to someone. They don't go to God. They don't love God. And so it not only remains a bad thing, but goodness doesn't come out of it. And then the worst thing is they have to watch the person who did the bad thing, who turned their life over to Jesus, all of a sudden starting to experience goodness. All of a sudden starting to see God's mercy. And it's like, whoa, that's totally unfair. And it's like, yeah, it is absolutely unfair. But the opportunity lies to you who had the bad thing happen to you. God wants to work through all things. Let's not forget, church, that the focal point of our faith is how God saved all of us. God leveraged what was the most violent symbol at the time, a cross, and the most conclusive symbol, that of a grave, to bring us life. But life to who? Not just those after the fact, but life for the very people who led him to the cross. God loves to bring goodness out of bad things. Will it change how you feel about your mistakes? Will you feel better about yourself? Will you feel better about what you did? No, probably not. And that's okay, because that's not the point. The point is that you and I experience the lavish grace of God who can bring goodness out of all things. Somebody say all things. That's the backdrop of what James is getting at here in verse 16, where he pivots and he interjects and he said, okay, so don't be misled, my dear brothers and sisters. Somebody say, why so? Why so? All right, so here's why all of a sudden he turns. He's like, okay, so, which means he's about to add a clarification on everything that he has said up until this point. What did he say up until this point? Well, he said a lot, but most notably a couple things. First of all, he talked about how God uses our trials, our hardship, the diverse ways that we are tested in this life to grow us. That was James 1, 2 through 4. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. And let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. In other words, be hopeful when bad things happen, because God uses bad things for good. Okay, we've gotten that. All right, moving on. The other most notable thing that James includes is what ramps right up into verse 16, which is verses 13 and 15. And he says this, he says, and remember, when you're being tempted, do not say, God is tempting me. God is never tempted to do wrong, and he never tempts anyone else. Temptation comes from our own desires, which entice us and drag us away. These desires give birth to sinful actions, and when sin is allowed to grow, it gives birth to death. In short, what he's saying here is when trials come, man, God will use them to grow us, but there's usually always a temptation that walks hand in hand with the trial. And that temptation is never from God. God never tempts us to do evil, but instead, temptation comes from within us, comes from our desires, comes from our flesh. But God never tempts. That is never a work of God. God is never like, hey, I want to see if you love me, and so, hey, check out, the person on treadmill number 3 over there. That's not your spouse. Come on. That's never God. God never tempts us, but to nuance this just a little bit, God does test us, though. But testing is very, very different from tempting. Testing is when God seeks to prove or refine our faith. Think of how Jesus healed the blind man that I briefly mentioned last week in John chapter 9. Where Jesus heals the blind man, and Jesus most certainly could have just said the word, right, that we sung about, one word from you, could have used one word, could have just touched the blind man's eyes, but instead, what did Jesus choose to do? He chose to do something very odd and unexpected. He gets down, he spits into the mud, spits into the dirt, making it mud, grabs the mud, puts it on the guy's face, and then says to the guy, go walk to the pool of Siloam and you'll be healed. And he is testing the man's faith. That every step that man took to the pool of Siloam with mud on his face was a test of his faith. Very different from tempting, which is when we are being enticed to do evil. Jesus was not tempting the man to do evil. He was testing that man's faith. When you think of temptation, I mean, come on, go with the OG story. Think of the serpent in the Garden of Eden. Come on, do what God told you not to do. Come on. That's temptation, and God never tempts us. And so never say that God is tempting you. Okay, and so James has emphasized how trials are actually good for our souls. He's emphasized that God doesn't tempt us, so don't say that he's tempting you. And in light of all of that, he goes on to clarify who we should expect God to be and how we should expect God to show up in our lives, which brings us to verse 16. So don't be misled, my dear brothers and sisters. Whatever is good and perfect is a gift coming to us from God our Father, who created all the lights in the heavens. He never changes or casts a shifting shadow. All right, so one last time, our first point that we looked at last week was not everything you've been given is from God. But in the end, everything can be made right, is going to be made right. And until then, God can turn all things for good. And this week, I just want to unpack the second big idea of this series, which is this, that God's gifts are always good. And here's why, because they reflect who he is. God's gifts are always good because they reflect who he is, as we consider what God is doing in our lives. And I'm really, next week, I'm going to get a little particular in one of the worst gifts that God gives us. And so I'm going to get a little particular next week, but I am strategically not putting a lot of hypotheticals in this, because I want to challenge us as a church to look to God as we're looking at our lives, okay? And as we consider what God is doing, as we think about the ways that God is working in our lives, we need to understand that everything that he does in us and for us is always good. Why is it good? Is it good because what he's doing is always a reflection of what we ask for? And is it good because God just is always going through our little Christmas list and check, oh, yep, this is good because this is what I asked God for? No. Is it good because what God is doing is always like, is in our style? Like even though we don't ask for it, like God knows your style and he knows what you like. And so even though you don't ask for it, the responses are going to be like, oh my gosh, you know me, like you just knew that I would love this. Is it good because we look at every gift and we go like, oh, I always like stuff like this? No. Is it good even that because it reflects how God supposedly feels about us? And so like this Christmas, if God is giving you an oven mitt, like, well, that's just kind of where you're at. No. Rather, God's gifts are always good because they reflect who he is. The goodness is not based on our requests. The goodness is not based on what we're interested in. And guess what? The goodness is not based on how he feels about you. But the good and perfect gifts reflect who God is. And so don't be misled, my dear brothers and sisters. You can understand why James is stopping right here. And he's like, don't get tricked. Like, we missed this. We messed this up. We get really confused about God. And again, think of where he's just come from. He's just talked about trials. He's talked about temptations. He's like, hey, in light of all that, because life is going to be really hard and you're going to be tempted, in light of all that, don't get confused. This is who God is. This is what God does. Don't miss this mix. Nothing impacts our ability to embrace what God is doing in our lives like our understanding of who God is. This is what I want to dwell on this morning. And so let me say it two other ways. Second way of saying it, that as we grow in our understanding of who God is, we gain a better understanding of what he's doing. As we grow in our understanding of who God is, we are better able to embrace what he's doing. Let me say it a third way. If you're having a hard time understanding what God is doing in your life and how God is supposedly blessing you and doing good things in your life, if you're feeling kind of bewildered about God's presence in your life, get this, the issue isn't with your understanding of what's in the gift bag. The issue isn't with your understanding with what's in your life. The issue is with your understanding of the giver. And as we get to know God, we grow in our understanding of his character, as we expand our perspective of who he is, as we get to know his heart, as we get to get more in tune and more in tune with the Spirit of God, we gain a deeper understanding and appreciation for what God is doing. And here's why this is so important for us. Because a lot of times we process things and we consider things in reverse. We do things backwards. We try to make sense of who God is by trying to understand what God is doing. Maybe you don't, so I'll go first. Because I still struggle with this from time to time, where I will look at what's in my life, and then I will try to make sense of God based on the gift in my hand. And maybe you've never said this, but I know that I've said this. I just don't understand why you would give this to me. I just don't, I don't understand why you would allow this to happen in my life. God, this is not what I asked for. And as I'm looking at what's happening here, man, I'm developing a pretty dark perspective of who you are. This isn't who I thought you were. Notice the order there. This, what's in your life, what God is seemingly doing, this isn't who I thought you were. And I'm trying to understand who God is, but I'm starting with what's in my life. And specifically, I'm starting with a very, very specific variable in my life. And additionally, I'm starting with my very, very limited understanding of what's in my life. And the danger here, Mix, is that if this is your MO, if this is how you walk with God, if this is how I continue to grow in my relationship, here's what will happen, is we will end up with a life-informed view of God instead of a God-informed view of our lives. It's a good question worth pondering. Do you have a life-informed view of God or a God-informed view of what's happening in your life? Do you see God in light of your life, or do you see your life in light of God?